Thank you everyone for being here, taking time out of your day. I know we always have a lot going on, so really appreciate you being here today. We are going to talk about insurance and why it matters, why it's important, and the kind of insurance options that you should be thinking about to protect your association. We have with us today Kendra Walker and Seth Fleischer from Aon Affinity, partners with the Business Solutions here team here at ASAE. And because we're on a short schedule today, a quick hit information session. Let's just go ahead and get started.
Thank you so much for having us, myself and my colleague Seth. We're going to go over a few different types of coverage liabilities, kicking it off with management liability, what some also have known historically as D&O insurance, or directors and officers insurance. So just quickly, what D&O insurance is, for those that may not be familiar on this webinar, is D&O is really just coverage to protect the organization for such things as allegations of negligence, conflicts of interest, financial mismanagement concerns and challenges, errors and judgments, and then things around the employee related context, meaning EPL issues. So think of, in that context, think of such things as race and age discrimination claims, failure to promote claims. That's a very kind of very short, concise definition of what management liability is, but that's usually the crust of it. And then within the management liability, there is also, again, the EPL coverage part, and then the fiduciary liability coverage part. So the management liability insurance, or what people typically refer to it as D&O, consists of three parts. Your D&O, which is, again, coverage for allegations of such things as negligence. Your EPL, or employment practices liability, which covers such things as wrongful termination, allegations of sexual harassment. And then you have your fiduciary liability, which addresses such things as allegations of improper handling of an employee benefit plan, such as a 401k retirement plan or a 403b plan. So that's the management liability in a nutshell. And then another important insurance that a lot of our association clients look for and are in need of are what we call E&O, or what we call E&O insurance, or errors and omissions insurance. And in the association's world, that typically is coverage that provides protection to the association around your certification program, or your standard setting program, or if you have an accreditation program. So think of it in the context, if you are in a professional association, or a trade association, or perhaps an actual certifying body, you are making recommendations around what are the best practices and standards within my particular industry that allows professionals within that industry to go out and serve the community. So again, if you have a concern around E&O insurance, or errors and omissions insurance, that typically pertains to when your association is involved with standard setting, certification, and accreditation. And then we can advance to the next slide. Thank you so much. So some common claims are in the management liability sector. Wrongful termination. You can imagine that's probably a very high case value situation. We're working with people every day. Everyone has different personalities, and everyone has different needs. So the HR kind of EPL section is a really high driving factor of a lot of claims that we see in the association space. Other such claims, or other examples, could be claims around membership discrimination, or disagreements with peer review panels, and perhaps this improper advice given around investment choices, or again, your 401k plans. Some frequently asked questions on the management liability side. There are a few bullet points down here, but I'll probably touch on, maybe just in the interest of time, just one or two quickly that I see from my association clients that arise quite frequently. The first thing is questions around, well, hey, Kendra, I have an association. We're pretty much an all-volunteer organization. We're fairly small. We don't have any employees. Why do I need employment practices liability if I don't, in fact, have any employees? The reason why employment practices liability is important, even when you do not have employees, is third-party coverage is found within your EPL, your employment practices liability coverage. And what third-party coverage does, it provides protection to the association should a claim be filed by a third party, meaning someone outside of the association. So think of a member of the community, or a client or a customer, and they make an allegation against the organization for sexual harassment. Right? That's a third party claim. So if you remove employment practices liability, you, in essence, remove third party liability coverage. And I can't think of any association that is not in some form or manner or way working with third parties, because that's, one of the great things that association does is engage with our communities on a very frequent basis. So that's one thing to really keep in mind if you're a small nonprofit without no employees and you're considering removing EPL. It's a cautionary tale around that you want to maintain that third party coverage that's built into the EPL coverage part. And then quickly around, does my organization need fiduciary liability coverage to cover my claims such as financial mismanagement? So fiduciary liability from an insurance perspective means coverage for or protection to the association for allegations of mismanagement of an employee benefit plan. Okay, which is different than the working term fiduciary, meaning I'm responsible for managing an association, making decisions on behalf of my association regarding the general financial decisions. And the general financial decision making and the risk of that around that area is already addressed in the D&O or management or D&O part of the management liability policy. I'm sorry. So yeah, I will leave you all to run through look at some of those questions or FAQs within the management liability coverage part. But certainly, if there are any questions, feel free to put them in the chat, and I'll be happy to answer any of those. And then lastly, some emerging exposures to consider around the management liability space. Social inflation factors, increased prices around, just daily living. And then that's taking a hit on employees' annual salaries and how those salaries actually stretch and play out in our day-to-day lives. Allegations or conversations around decreased compensation because of that. And then alternatively around or associations that have highly compensated individuals or employees. That's something to consider when you're thinking about management liability and structuring your management liability policy in place. And then California, many of you may be aware in the insurance space that California is a highly volatile, I would say, state currently, and has been in years past, particularly around the employment practices liability exposure. And what I mean by that is the cost to cover claims should an EPL claim arise has skyrocketed. So it's just something to bear in mind when you're thinking about your management liability program or your existing structure, or thinking about purchasing a management liability policy, and you're based in California, or have, maybe you're based in another state, but have employees in California. That's something to bear in mind when you're thinking about your management liability policy structure. Okay, and then I will turn this is now for our event cancellation insurance. I'll turn this over to my colleague, Seth. Thank you, everyone.
Thanks, Kendra. Hey, everyone. I'm actually going to start with that bottom bullet point, the unique exposure for nonprofits, just to try to help everyone understand how does event cancellation insurance, it's an optional coverage that people can buy. It's a really niche market. How does that fit in to the association space? And, event cancellation could be offered for any type of event, could be a corporate event, a for-profit entity. But specifically for nonprofits, the annual convention or conference makes up so much of the operating revenue for that association. You're really putting so much, into the 3-day event, so to speak, that's why it's so important for these associations, for the nonprofits to hold cancellation insurance. Now, within the event cancellation coverage, we have different types of coverage that we can offer. We're not just offering the full cancellation of an event. I mean, that's the kind of the catastrophic loss, but there we have a lot of different, what I would call partial losses. You see in the top section, event cancellation, but then we've also mentioned interruption, postponement, rescheduling. These are partial loss scenarios. So the full cancellation is obviously the catastrophic loss. The entire event gets canceled. But we do have these scenarios where maybe 1 day out of a 3-day event is canceled, or if the event is canceled, and you do have an option to postpone or postpone to a later date or reschedule to another location, and that could be months later. The policy will reimburse for the resulting financial loss as a result of rescheduling. So we're talking about loss of revenue if there are certain attendees that can't make the rescheduled event, or extra expenses related to duplicate expenses in order to because those were already spent for the original event. The event's canceled, and then you have to pay those expenses again for the rescheduled. But essentially, the event cancellation insurance, it's financial protection. Let's not get it confused with event liability coverage, which typically is going to be required by the venue. It's that slip and fall coverage in case somebody gets hurt. So again, event cancellation, we're financially we're insuring the financial exposure, being the gross revenue for the event as well as the committed expenses. A few other points here around just the structure. I mean, we can insure just the main, your major annual conference as a single event policy, but we also write a number of multiple event policies for your annual conference, as well as quarterly conferences or mid-year events throughout the year. I've listed here are just some of the common claims and exposures under event cancellation. I would really bucket that first one, adverse weather, almost in its own category, because every year, pretty much without fail, we're seeing claims from adverse weather, such as winter storms, hurricanes. Those other items, while they're common, definitely less frequent, but we do have, wildfires become an issue on the West Coast. Any kind of venue damage, whether that be fire, flood, power outage, and don't think of that in terms of just what's happening during your event. If a fire, or a major flood causes damage to your venue, months in advance of your event, that could cause a loss. And as long as you have the insurance in place at that time, at the time that the cause of loss occurs, the policy could respond. The other one here, civil commotion, just in the political environment we're in. This is, along the lines of riots and protests, maybe around the venue, something where streets could be blocked off and access to the venue would be denied. And then various types of labor disputes as well, hotel, airline strikes that you depend on to run your event. Those could impact it as well. But really, kind of the hidden value to the event cancellation policy is that the way the policy is structured, it specifically lists all the areas of exclusion. So anything that's not specifically excluded could be covered. So while I've listed there the common claims and exposures, it's kind of an infinite or open-ended list of the potential coverage provided by the event cancellation policy, as long as it's not specifically excluded. And then just in terms of some of the frequently asked questions that we get around event cancellation, how is it priced? We're looking at for the most part, the date and location of the event, because that's going to tell us, is there some kind of additional exposure for hurricane or winter weather or earthquake? So, knowing the date and location of the event will help us determine, are there additional exposures to consider? And then the limit for the coverage is based purely on the event budget. So talking about your budgeted gross revenue or the expenses. This isn't a coverage where you just kind of pick your limit like other types of insurance. It's based purely on the budget, because that's what we're insuring. And we do want to insure the full budget, 100% of your exposure. How far in advance? Well, we can issue policies up to 3 years in advance. I'd say the sweet spot for our clients in the association community is probably purchasing the coverage 6 to 12 months in advance. But again, once you have contracts in place with venues and you start incurring expenses, if that's multiple years in advance, again, we can write these policies up to 3 years in advance. Unfortunately, coverage is still not available for COVID or communicable diseases. If you're familiar with this product, going back several years, it was available as an optional coverage add-on prior to COVID-19. But based on just the unprecedented number of claims in the market, that was taken off the table and it's still not available. To apply for coverage, just a basic application. It's going to be, asking about your basic event details, date, location, budget, and a few additional questions. And then down there, some of the emerging exposures that might impact event cancellation. Of course, climate change, more active storm seasons, active assailant. While active assailant, we're talking about somebody maybe breaching security, getting into a venue with a deadly weapon. That resulting in cancellation of an event has always been in place. What we've added actually recently is a liability component for third-party liability for attendees of the event. For the association to have that coverage in place for an active assailant incident, as well as crisis management. And then the last one there, again, civil commotion, just based on the political environment we've been in. Increase in protests and riots and things of that nature. And I believe now we will flip back to the business insurance section with Michelle Evans.
Hi, everyone. Let's talk about property insurance. So from a coverage standpoint, for the business owner's policy, what you really should be thinking about is a bundled policy. That policy is going to cover your general liability, your auto liability, your crime, and your workers' compensation. Those are all part of one policy form. In addition to that, you also may need an umbrella policy. An umbrella policy is an excess policy that goes over and above your general liability, your non-owned and hired, and your employer's liability. Some policies also include cyber liability. There may be a separate policy or it's part of the bundled policy itself. Next slide, please. Thanks. So what are some of the common claims that you should be thinking about when you're having an event? So general liability itself, that's what we call a third-party liability coverage. That's basically like your slip and fall coverage. So if you're having an event and the venue is asking for coverage, proof of coverage, that's going to be under your general liability coverage. Usually they'll also ask for what's called a certificate of insurance. Some of the other types of common claims are employee theft or crime coverage. That's the number one type of claim that we see for associations. And then lastly, workers' compensation. That is if there are any employees that you have. So some of the frequently asked questions: if someone falls at my convention, what policy is going to respond there? That's going to be the general liability coverage. How about I only need general liability for a conference? Why should I purchase an annual policy and why should I purchase a BOP? Keep in mind that regardless of whether you have a remote location, you all working remotely, or you have a physical location, you still have the exposures of an association. So you may think that you don't need general liability or an office package, but every association still has all the same exposures of an organization, whether they work remotely or whether there's a physical location. Does my policy include coverage for accreditation or standard settings exposure? Most BOPs do not. As a matter of fact, most BOPs have what's called a professional liability exclusion. If your organization does any type of settings, standards, benchmarking, certification, guidelines, that should be purchased on a separate policy. That's an errors and omissions policy or a professional liability policy. The words are, they're used interchangeably, but it's an errors and omissions policy that you need. Can our chapters be covered on a BOP? Some organizations call them chapters, some call them affiliates. The ASAE product does have the ability to offer chapters or a standalone chapter policy, but many other carriers do not offer chapter liability on a BOP. And then some of the emerging exposures, we're running out of time. Some of the emerging exposures to consider. Right now, most policies are not including any type of communicable disease coverage. But that is something that you should be aware of, especially after COVID. And then contracts interacting with events and have certain requirements. That's extremely important. On every contract, there's usually an insurance section that outlines the coverages that your organization would be responsible or the venue is responsible. What you should do is take that insurance section of the contract and send it to your broker to make sure that the coverages that you have in place also are coverages that the venue are asking for. Sometimes there's coverages that you may need to get additionally, and your insurance broker may even be able to say, look, this section of the contract you don't have, go back to the venue and see if you can negotiate that out, whether that be a higher liability coverage, an umbrella coverage. There may be liquor liability that's required, where some policies, including our own, include host liquor liability. You may be able to push back on those types of exposures so you don't have to go out and get additional coverages. And then right now, the property market as a whole, that's really still hardening. So what you're going to find is the pricing overall is somewhat higher right now. And that's really just the cost of construction goods are higher. The claims for communicable diseases are higher. So you will find that the pricing right now is a little higher versus in years past.
Okay, I think we covered all the main sections, right?
That's correct. Yep.
All right, thank you. So there is one question in the chat that I don't know that was addressed. There were a couple others, but I think you've answered those already. One about, do you need to name each virtual home office in the general liability policy?
So when you say general liability policy, I'm going to say a business owner's policy. If there is what we call real property, desks, chairs, file cabinets, laptops, and you want those covered, those items covered, that entity should be listed within the policy. Otherwise, there's no coverage for business personal property. From a general liability standpoint, you only need to name that location if individuals are coming in and out of your home. So if there's no activity, no traffic, that location doesn't need to be named. But if there's business personal property you want coverage for, then you need to list that location.
I don't see any other questions in the chat, and I know we are at time. So I want to thank Michelle and Seth and Kendra for your time today and for the great information and education. And insurance is a complex topic. So thank you for answering the questions. And to all of you in the audience, thank you so much for joining us. Really appreciate your time. Oh, look, we're getting lots of thank yous in the chat. So very engaged audience and appreciative audience. So everyone have a fantastic rest of your day.